Okay, so I am here for another installment. Interviewing another great musician. This time it's Cassandra House.
Hi.
Um, Hi. So how are you doing?
Oh, you know, hanging in.
Hanging in there. It's been a strange time, but we're all, I get a sense from a lot of musicians that I talk to that we're all keeping it very positive,
Yeah, trying to.
doing our
Definitely.
best. So I'll just jump right in and ask you, like, when did you start playing out? Like, how long have you been doing your thing for?
Oh my God. I mean, well, there's like two different, I think maybe two or three different things going on. Like I started playing my original songs out when I was, um, God, I guess like 14 was my first show.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was weirdly enough, it was at like a universal Unitarian congregational church, um, and it was all originals, which was so cool and awesome. So like my first exposure to playing out at all was like such a supportive of like original music, which is not everyone can really find that, you know.
That's really tough to find.
And then of course there were like the years of like playing covers, and then there was the whole, doing it professionally versus, but I guess 14 was the
were
easiest.
you did you play guitar in that first gig? Were you always singing and playing guitar?
Yes, yes.
Nice. But I've always considered you to be a really talented performer, or as long as I've known you for. And you bring it across a few different groups, a few I should say. And what's kind of like the underlying thing that you look to bring in all the music that you perform?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question. Um, it's both, I kind of want to make people feel understood, which is why I tend to like write music. It sounds selfish when you just like write a song about like what you're feeling and your feelings on a particular subject, but I try not to like tell people too much about like what each of my songs are about, because I want them to find their own meaning in it, and in a way sort of feel less alone in the world, like, sometimes I write about really specific stuff, but I'll hear from other people, oh, I thought the song was about the way that I interpreted it, or the way that it speaks to me is. And I want to like be able to like keep that sort of open for interpretation. So, I think the whole reason why I do it, because I don't know if I would survive if I didn't. So it's both a catharsis for me and also just being able to give that kind of catharsis to other people, if that makes any sense.
I get it. It's definitely a shared emotion sort of
Yeah.
thing. And I definitely know what you mean. The analysis of lyrics definitely drives a lot of musicians. And I think you just said that it's kind of an important part of yours to understand where your fans have been coming from. What would you say, coming from emotionally and kind
Yeah,
of
sure. Yeah.
where they're at, what would you say is your favorite part of getting to interact with people? Because I'd say that like you have a really unique relationship with your fans, and I'm not just saying that. I told you once I was working sound at Blue Point, and you switched with someone, so you were on the schedule, but you
Yeah.
switched with someone, and a
Yeah.
lot of people showed up there and said like, why, like, where, not why isn't she here, but like, where's Cassandra? Like, I thought this was Cassandra's night.
Right,
And
right.
like, why do you think that people are so interested in coming out to see you specifically?
I sometimes I don't really know. And sometimes when I hear like that other people actually care and they're not just like going out to see just whoever, and like they actually care who it is, and specifically they care that it would be me or not me, still kind of like boggles my mind, because I'm like, well, I don't get it. I also like, I think a lot of creatives, like a lot of anybody who creates anything, we have this weird like imposter syndrome. Like we think like we don't sort of like deserve the accolades, or no matter how hard we work, we're not working hard enough, we're not good enough, whatever. So when I hear that people like care that much, I honestly don't understand it. But then when I like really think about it, I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know. I think I don't really necessarily play happy music. It's not unhappy all the time, but I think I may sometimes plug into like those weird little dark corners of emotion, like in say like a brewery or something like that. People tend to like, you know, a jam band or something like that, because they're drinking, they're eating, they're partying, whatever. I think sometimes I just sort of flip a weird switch that maybe surprises people. And I've seen like people come to the brewery like not looking to party, like they'll just sit down alone with a beer just to listen, almost like it's a listening room. Because I think quite possibly I sort of like am unapologetically emotional, even in my interpretations of like sort of boppy songs. Like I'll like take it and spin it and try and like show you the raw side of it. So I don't know. I think it's just, I'm also like very, I try not to lie or put on an act or fake it really with anyone. So
that shows.
I sort of appreciate that. I don't know. That's my only, like, that's my hypothesis, but I don't really know.
That definitely bleeds through in what you do. It's funny how you talk about like the imposter syndrome and like not like fully being aware, I guess, of how other people might perceive you. I've heard musicians talking in this time though, when no one can play any gigs. And I'm starting to look back into some archives of performances that I've done. You can take somewhat of an opportunity to reflect on what you're doing a little bit and what is and isn't working and why some people might like stuff. But it's really interesting, and it's nice to hear that you bring it from an authentic place, because I think that's also just a really true thing. But we'll get into your album, because there's a lot to talk about there. It's called The Roam, right?
Yes, sir.
And that came out, that was your first solo album?
So I did an EP in like 2012. That was my first like sort of go at like choosing the songs, not distributing it. What's the word? I guess like making whatever, I can't think of the word, but like making copy, you know, like, yeah.
Okay. Distribution is a good way of saying that. Packaging it.
Packaging, sure, yeah. So that was my first go at like making like a tangible product. But I used to record with my brother when I was like really young. But that was like reel to reel, so this is insane, that process. But this album it's I think 8 songs long, so technically it's not a full length, but I call it my first full length. And it was my first go at co-producing, so I had a big hand in like pretty much every second of sound that you hear on it. I would say it's my first like thing that I'm like vastly proud of.
Well, congrats on being proud for it, or proud of it. It sounds really good.
Thank you.
So you co-produced it. Who was that with?
Ben Wish.
Okay, where is he based out of?
He's based out of New Jersey, but that's where he lives. But I would call him based out of NYC and the surrounding area. He is the coolest dude. I really can't say enough about him. He's like this amazing yoga instructor, like very zen dude. He just like casually has a couple Grammys, like no big deal. He produced Walking in Memphis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was sort of like awestruck when I first met him, but then we sort of hit it off in a really big way. And then we spent a very, very long time like sitting with each other. And he was super respectful, like, of my ideas and choices and suggestions. And then he would also like bounce some suggestions off me. So I was present for every second of the recording process.
That's awesome. What studio did you record that at?
I was out of his home, actually.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So there are like some lush harmonies on your album. There's some just really full instrumentation. Who were some of the people that you had on the record?
So the lush harmonies are just me singing on top of my own voice, which is ridiculous. But John Predis is on the cello. Dave March is on the bass. Anthony Pravada is on electric guitar. Bob Sander also helped sort of engineer the guitar parts as well. Cool. And Chris Marshak on drums.
Gotcha.
He's a wizard.
Yeah, he is indeed a wizard. So that's really a great local cast of musicians. Like, I guess some peeps from Miles to Dayton, and Chris just plays a lot with a lot of different people.
Chris is everywhere.
Yeah, he's a great drummer. That's one of the great things about being involved in the music scene where you're from. I don't know if you've always been based, or if most of your life you've been based out of Patchogue, but it's the most happening place for live music on Long Island, I would say, east of New York City.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's funny because like a lot of people tend to call like a lot of musicians that are local the Patchogue music scene. Mainly because that's where they play, but not necessarily where they're from. I know a lot of people that are based out of Huntington, they're based out of the North Shore, but they would even, call themselves part of the Patchogue music scene. It's just sort of, I think it's because of the way that it sort of mushroomed out, like it was like this crazy, like weird atomic bomb of creativity. And the sort of the epicenter of that was Patchogue. But it is my hometown. I was born in Patchogue, born and raised before it was a creative place to be, before it was a safe place to be. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the people that I have and to keep on meeting people through just like the support and loyalty of like many different venues throughout the island. But for a long time, not a long time, but definitely the better part of my 20s, I didn't live here. Or I lived here for a hot moment, but I didn't really play all that much music. I would like frequent some open mics. I didn't really gig. I gigged a little bit like over the summer. But I spent a brief stint in Europe. I spent a brief stint in California. So there are a lot of people that have been living and playing with each other here for like way longer than I've known them. They just sort of took me under their wing, which I was super happy about.
Why wouldn't you be? There's some great musicians to be involved with around here, or sure. in Patchogue, and I guess some great venues too. I'll ask you about one that you're involved with. I'll ask you about it, JTs Farm House, because you were booking over there.
Yeah.
Do you know what's going on there now?
No. Well, no. That's the short answer. No, I have no idea what's going on really anywhere. At the moment, as far as like restaurants and stuff, some restaurants are choosing to just completely shut down until they know it's like 100% safe. Some are doing like whatever they're doing, but I know for a fact that the live music obviously is shut down because there are no gatherings of any kind.
As someone that gigs myself and has a lot of friends that gig, I am somewhat concerned about what is going to be there, like where we're going to be able to play, and if these places are going to be able to stick it through these tough times. So
right. Two things I think at work. One thing at work is, can whatever small businesses we're used to playing at survive this? Like at the end of the day, will they still even really be there? Or I think also another thing at play is if they are there, when will it open, and when will people feel safe enough to go?
Yeah.
And then there's also like, I think us and maybe contractors and like very few other professions sort of have to plan. Basically, I was talking to my friend down in Maryland. She books a tour every year. And that, not only do tours take a long time to book, but you have to book far out in advance. And if you don't know, if this is completely indefinite and you don't know when it's going to start back up again, so to speak, you can't be going and booking a tour, 6 months in advance. I don't even know if I'm playing the summer music festivals that I'm used to playing. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be postponed or moved or canceled altogether. So it's really scary, because I hope that whenever it pops back up, whatever it, however we want to say that, that whatever book, like gigs I already have booked at least will be there in the end. Or when do I start as a booker? When do I start booking for the summer? Or when do I start sending out the emails that's saying, hey man, that June date we talked about, I don't know.
Yeah. It's really tough to know what direction all of the venues, because that's another thing too. There's so many moving pieces, and that you don't want to annoy people, because they have a lot of things that they have their own livelihoods to worry about. So it's tough it's going to be tough to deal with. I booked a whole batch of shows, a whole tour that obviously couldn't happen. Nobody's spring tours are going on.
No. Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's certainly a whole bunch of work and that whole thing. But you realize, like, I realized before we even officially called it, like, yeah, like it looks like it's not going to go our way, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
But we're all coping with it, and we're managing to have a decent time through all this. Doing the home thing, it's become necessary to find whatever ways I can to connect with people.
Sure.
Because I'm always just it's always my goal to be networking and to be just to be interfacing with different musicians, and I don't know, I feel like I've learned so much from just those connections that I make, and those people that are doing different things that I get, you get to hear different perspectives from different people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm glad I could just take an opportunity to sit down with you. You're a great person to talk to about just kind of everything that's been going on and everything that you've been up to. It really gives any musician a good understanding of what kind of approach you might think about having in an ever-changing landscape,
Yeah. I think it's I think as people who don't have their own booking agent, or even booking agents are dealing with this right now, we have to be planners by nature, and so this goes against everything that we're used to. Do you know what I mean? I feel horrible for even the bigger bands out there, that have 5-6 members plus a manager and all this crew and a lighting guy and a sound guy, and they have 20 people depending on them, and they're, like you said, they're canceling their spring tours, summer music festival, same thing. You look at those bands that you look up to, and they're in the same shit that you are, and you're like, holy crap, there's a reason why that whole CARES Act is happening, and why I guess unemployment for the most part is starting to be open to self-employed, gig-based workers, because it definitely didn't go unnoticed by the entire country. And also, not for nothing, I think we were the first to kind of lose our jobs for the most part. Even when restaurants and venues and everything were staying open, they were definitely canceling music because of just lack of business, or I don't know, or we became very expendable very quickly.
Oh yeah, that's always been the case. It's unfortunate to say, and sometimes playing original music, it can be hard to find people that understand the value of that. I think in the musical community of Patchogue, one of the good things about that is most of the people that are regulars, not just playing, but going out to see music and supporting it. They understand that there's something to support there, and that these people are taking their time, and it's there's only so many people that are playing out, and there's so many places to go play, and it's a great thing in a place like Patchogue to see good support. I've been at plenty of gigs with tip jars in that town, and I see musicians do pretty well. And that's a great thing. That means that like the local guy that's just coming down after work is happy to put money into the music scene and to support people that are putting themselves out there. So yeah. There's a lot of value to that. One thing that I'll ask you about, we mentioned Chris Marshak earlier. I know you played a really kick-ass show. I was kicking my ass for not making it to that show at the loading dock.
That's so fun.
So tell me a little bit about that. It was also Anthony Pravada on guitar for that, right? He's a regular in your band, right?
Yes.
Who do you normally? Is Chris a regular for you too?
Yes.
Wow. See,
Chris has been with us for oh my God, maybe 6 years, possibly 7.
Wow.
Long time. I think 6 years.
It's not easy to come across someone with such a good feel like that.
I know, dude. He it's so organic. I just trust him. Do you know what I mean? Like, because sometimes, honestly, like I'll be nervous or I'll have like a weird brain blip while I'll forget like what I'm doing or if I already sang that verse or like but I kind of like trust him to sort of just like carry it through. And there's nothing better than like having a really, really good backbone,
Yeah. Who do you have playing bass for you?
That's Dave March.
Oh, Dave's the best. Dave's just a sweetheart.
Yeah. No, I have a good solid core group of folks, and Jackie Ruth on background vocals, and sometimes percussion when she wants to. But my core group of peeps are pretty cool. They help me arrange original music. Like I roll in with like a new song, and it's basically just like most of the time it's just vocals and guitar. So I give them free rein. They write their own parts. So it's sort of everyone's like shared creativity in a way,
Yep. It's great when you have people that can really come up with parts and play impressive parts. It's you were saying, you mentioned organic or natural at one point earlier on describing your music or your approach, or honest. And I feel like getting a bunch of talented people in a room and saying like, all right, like here's the outline, like fill it in for me. Like, trusting people's instincts will really get you a long way. Back to that show at the loading dock though. So that was at the Patchogue Theater, right?
Yeah. So the loading dock is like technically, I don't really know if it's even technically, it's definitely billed as its own venue, but it is within another venue. So it's like a venue within a venue. It's super fractal. It's just the stage at the Patchogue Theater. So the audience sits on the stage with the band. So it's sort of like this weird like crescent moon situation, and then the band sort of sits directly in the center. But then like there's a bar in the backstage area, and the like restrooms are where the dressing rooms are usually. So it's sort of like a cute little interactive experience, let alone it's super intimate. I think it caps out at max like 130 tickets.
Okay.
So people can sit down in like little bistro tables and stuff like that, or stand or whatever. So it's super intimate because they're like right up on you,
That's really cool. That's a great way to interface with your fans there.
Yeah, it was really fun. Really fun.
So on the topic of interfacing with your fans, I'll just ask you, like, what's been your change in approach now that you're not performing?
It's definitely difficult not seeing people, not just like, and I don't really like need to see people's reactions to sort of feel it, but it definitely like, I mean, you know, even as a musician, like you feel the energy in a room, you feel it shift. Like that's the whole thing about like reading rooms. It's not just based on like demographic, age, or whatever. It's also like you got to feel like the mood of the room. So it's really, really hard when you can't feel the mood of like what, you know, 100 rooms throughout the island or the country or whatever, and like how everyone's doing or feeling. I mean, you can get like little tidbits, little comments or emojis or whatever, but I kind of rely on that energy to sort of feed off of. It's weird, like it's like a symbiotic kind of relationship when you play live. When I practice, even at rehearsals and stuff like that, it's not that I don't give my all, but it feels like there's a huge chunk missing, you know?
Yeah, it gets cranked up.
Hard.
Yeah, it's been tough. There's definitely a certain kind of energy that people feed off of. That just reminds me, as someone that works sound, like I've worked on a sound system with the band while they're practicing, and then when they actually get on stage and they start playing, it's just a whole different monster. It's like,
oh, totally. Totally.
Yeah, the energy level just changes. Adrenaline kicks in, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a strange thing. Like, who knows the next time we're gonna feel that adrenaline rush of being on stage? It's a weird thing. I hope it's sooner than later, but at the same time, people's health is being safe is the main concern.
I fantasize. I think it's also like a weird. It's like sort of like a serotonin or like dopamine kick to start like, it sounds so bizarre, but like to start like fantasizing about life as normal. I posted something last night that was like, all I know is the next time I get on stage, I'm going to play so freaking hard. Because like, it's almost like I get like really excited thinking about like the next time, like I'm going to see like people or especially perform for people in the same room as them. Like, these weird little things that we took for granted, like now I find myself like getting overjoyed just fantasizing about it and wondering when the hell that's going to be or how it's going to be, or am I going to be like extra nervous because there's all this like expectation, you know, like I have no idea. But it's a totally different ball game. But like you were saying earlier, you know, there are people that support the live music around here, and I've seen that now through the virtual, like FaceTiming or Instagram Live or whatever. Like people are very generous. I mean, I was up Schitt's Creek, to be honest, for a little while, and the support is still very much there, and if not weirdly stronger, because when you play a gig, say here in Patchogue, you play the brewery or whatever, whoever's there obviously gets to see you. But that's it. And I found myself like sort of on the positive side of this virtual world that we're living in. Like I get to perform concerts for my little cousins in South Carolina, my family in San Francisco, my family in Florida, like my friends that I went to college with in Boston or Nashville. Like now, in a weird way, in a positive way, like I'm expanding my horizons a little bit because of this quarantine.
Yeah, you know? It brings your performance to anybody instantly. So I guess that's a big positive of it. Have you been using this time at all to write more?
Yes, for sure.
That's a great thing. I think I think there's going to be a lot of material from a lot of great musicians that comes out of this time.
Definitely.
So.
Definitely.
You know, there's a silver lining, of course. I guess you mentioned that you've kind of performed on and off over the years, and you've found that you've come back to such a warm reception. But in that time that you were off, I'm just curious, was writing a constant thing for you, or have you experienced writer's block much in your life? Because it's definitely a fleeting thing for a lot of people.
It is definitely a very fickle mistress, but Um, I never really understood. It's not that I didn't understand writer's block, but because I'm sort of aware of how fleeting it is, like writer's block, this is going to sound so graphic, but I mean it in the least gross way. Writer's block always reminded me of sort of like constipation.
Okay. I understand that.
It's like mental constipation, but like, again, this is not intended to be graphic, but that's where it's going. Like, I know not to force it. Like, if I try and sit down and write a song and I'm not in the mood, or I'm too depressed, or I'm too happy sometimes, I'm not going to do this right now. It's like a little baby bird. You're like, it's super delicate and I don't want to like upset it or screw with it. I know like some people, they try and write 5 songs a week or a song a day, and they don't care if it's one's like shitty and one's fantastic. Like, everybody has their own little method. I have never really experienced writer's block, but that's mainly because I also don't have like a record company or anyone else like pressuring me for another album, or, I kind of do things in my own time, which I'm kind of lucky for. But I also have a back catalog of like a lot of songs that if I ever wanted to just like churn out an album, I could do that. But right now I'm just finding all of the voices have stopped, like all the noise has stopped. My email accounts are silent. Like, all of this extra stuff that I always had to do, I find myself not having to stress out and worry about it. I'm not booking. And though that's like a bad thing, it's also freed up so much space in my head so that like if I feel like writing a song, I sit down and do it. I try not to pressure myself too much, because I find that like this sort of half-assed thing pops out and I'm like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I know that's not my best. And sometimes it's the middle of the night where, but no, writer's block has never really been my thing. But when I was not living here, I wrote a couple songs actually off the Roam many years ago. And they took a really long time like getting out there, but I don't know. I've always written. When I spent time away in my early 20s, I was more focused on writing plays. I thought that was my thing. I would write a lot of poetry and like prose. And then I sort of like zoned into the song thing a little bit later on. But I've always written.
Yeah, I guess even at 14, you said you were performing original songs. So it's I guess it's in you in a live way, and it's kind of been that way for a while. It's really that's admirable. So you spent some time in Boston, you said?
Well, I did. I went to Berkeley in Boston for a year, and then I went to theater school for another year up in Boston. So I spent 2 years in Boston.
Okay, so what were the 2 years that you spent in Boston like?
Honestly, amazing, life-changing. It's really weird when I think kids should wait a little while to go to college. That's just my opinion, because I was such a space cadet. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I guess weirdly enough, I did know what I wanted to do, because Berkeley at the time was the only school that was offering songwriting as a major.
Gotcha.
So I just sort of zeroed in on that and was like, well, here we go. And little known fact, I'm absolute shit at music theory. So it was sort of difficult, definitely difficult. I wound up taking a lot of poetry classes and philosophy classes at a music school, but that's also because their adjuncts were from like MIT and Harvard. So I was getting like a seriously cool education just like on the sly. They were interesting because I still talk to and have gigged with and have kept in touch with so many people I met through going to Berkeley. So many of them are like annoyingly successful, like, and annoyingly talented. And it's like a freaking pleasure to have ever known them, especially as babies when we're like all trying to find our way. They're all, as far as like you said, like even networking, like that was like baby networking, and I didn't even realize it. I was like 18 or 19, and I was networking with some of like the best artists I will eventually know. And I stuck around there, and I lived with musicians my second year, but I dropped out of Berkeley and went to theater school, which was also a cool thing and a weird thing that eventually really helped me as far as like stage, like
Presence.
goes. Yeah, for sure. So living in Boston was weird. It was cool. I was very young. I lived with two beautiful people. I bounced around the city. I was constantly busy, much like I am now. I was bouncing from rehearsal to rehearsal. I was co-writing with my roommates in my spare time, but it was exactly what I needed at the time.
That sounds like a really full experience. And I'd say that your experience with some of your professors and some of the people at Berkeley definitely, or it seems like it probably prepared you to come and play with some of the best in the best on the island.
Yeah, I didn't even, honestly, like I got so freaked out and scared when you go to a place that's international, especially when music is concerned, you start to feel like the tiniest fish in the biggest pond. You know what I mean? Like I was definitely at school at some point with like, do you know who Esperanza Spalding is?
Yep.
Yeah. Like, okay, there, and I'm sitting here like playing like moderately acceptable chords on a guitar. Do you know what I mean? Like you start to go, okay, hold on. Maybe this is not my place. Like maybe this is not my jam, honestly. So I got freaked out. I'm glad I went. I'm glad I made the friendships and the contacts that I did. But I wasn't even prepared to be like a professional musician until many years later.
Hey, it takes a lot of preparation.
For
and
sure.
you mentioned at Berkeley that you took some theory classes and that wasn't really your thing, but you were a songwriting major there for the time that you spent there, and you're certainly still songwriting, and that's still a big part of what you do. Would you say that theory has been an important part? Like, is that, even though you may not have loved it, was it important to you, or are you do you find the music comes to you in a completely different mindset?
I feel like every music teacher friend that I know will hate me for saying theory has nothing to do with it, because of course, essentially and like irrevocably, it does have everything to do with it, because that's what it is. My process doesn't really work in that sort of mathematical sense. I'm not sitting down notating. I wouldn't necessarily say that I sit down and compose things. And even if I do, it's sort of this strange sort of stumbled upon situation. I kind of approach the musical side of it almost the same way I would approach like walking up to a blank canvas. Everything is just sort of like, okay, here we go. I do have more difficulty writing because I don't have like a really solid foundation in theory, because I'll just walk around the house singing a note, plinking on the guitar or plinking on the piano, being like, no, not that, living with me or being around me when I'm trying to write a song is really hysterical, because there's just a lot of like weird sounds coming from places while I'm trying to figure out, no, that's not but it goes like that. Okay. And so it takes me a lot longer if I'm trying to go in a direction, because I don't really know if that was supposed to be a diminished chord. How the hell do I, I definitely stumble on it like a baby in the forest, which is maybe not really helping me, but it's kind of the way that I've been doing it. But also with this free time, like I have considered like sitting down and being like, all right, I know it was over freaking 13 years ago, but what did I remember about this? Or picking up a book again. I was a lot better at it when I was younger in school because I had to be. But then I just sort of lost it. I definitely rely on my band members sometimes to help me out and be my compass. But no, it's definitely more of a like caveman, like touch, feel, see, hear, like it's a weird process.
Are you kind of constantly coming up with ideas, or is it like a very sort of I don't want to say meditative, but like, is the songwriting process for you kind of like something that you separate from your regular processes in life, or is it just kind of, you mentioned before, I'll just say that like you never force anything. Like
Yeah.
it can, if you're not feeling it today, there's always tomorrow.
Yeah.
So do you have to sit yourself down to crank out ideas? Do you use the guitar, or do you use the guitar, or are you on the piano more? Or?
No, well, when I was younger, I used to use the piano a lot. And then I realized that I am not a piano player at all. And also, like, I haven't practiced enough to be able to sing and play exactly what I'm hearing at the same time. So it's like broken English. I've been doing a couple different ways of like approaching writing. I know that I'm lucky to say that I don't really have to force it. I always feel like there's like this strange like fountain that if I make the conscious choice to tap into it, it's there. And I can churn out a song if I need to, or if I want to, or if someone challenges me or whatever. I don't know. I do feel like I have a lot of untapped resources happening, pretty much cycling at all times. And I think that a lot of that comes from when I was going to school, and even in high school, I would do a lot of what is it called when you just ramble on? Oh, help me out! My brain is frozen today.
Well, like improv comedy or something?
No, like stream of consciousness. I used to do a lot of stream of consciousness, like writing. Sometimes I would give myself like a structure of a poem. Or sometimes I would just stream of consciousness, like go on forever. With like some direction. But sometimes I would just sort of like turn off my like brain a little bit and just sort of let like the river flow.
Like turn off the filter. Yeah.
Yeah. But then sometimes I surprise myself. I would write something that I'd be like, oh my God, I had no idea I felt that way. But wow, I do. Or sometimes I would like string together some words and they'd start rhyming and I'd be like, oh, okay. And lately I've been taking old poems from like back in the day, because I used to write a lot more poetry than I did songs. Songs and their structure used to like scare me. The whole rhyming thing used to scare me. The whole A-B, or bridge or chorus or hook, like all of that structure used to like freak me out. So I'd be like, screw this, I'm just going to write a poem. And if it manages to rhyme, it manages to rhyme. If it doesn't, which most of them don't, I'm cool with that too. But in the past like week or so, I feel like I've been going back to those old poems and sort of rearranging them into songs. So like restructuring them. And that took out the writing process for me, really, because they're already written. I'm just sort of like playing like word search, which is just another fun, weird thing to do. But yeah, and then I'll just sit down with my guitar. Sometimes when I'm like sound checking at a gig, I'll play like a weird thing and I'll be like, sick, oh my God, and just sort of voice memo that. I have lots of snippets of songs in different places in the world that may never even find like their friends, it's all just all over the place.
Well, that's really great. I'm glad I got to talk to you about your process, because it's impressive, honestly, and it's really cool to hear it firsthand from you. There's definitely, I'll just leave it on this, just in songwriting, it can be a daunting thing, and you talked about the intimidating nature of song forms. But if you can manage to turn off the filter, like you said, as well, there's kind of something, you see how children are so, they have a sense of wonderment to everything in the world, and they'll say anything. There's not really as much of a filter, and they come from a more innocent place, kind of. And I've heard people say before that just by turning off that filter, and not blocking, not being afraid to say something stupid, essentially, you know,
Right.
just
Right.
letting go and letting your creative side just kind of do what you want it to do. You can, or not worrying about your judgment of it and just going, it can really do wonders. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we end it?
Yeah. And that's also to sort of piggyback on that. I feel like there's also this weird pressure to create a product out of when you turn that filter off, you know? But I think a very essential thing is like, because sometimes I feel like any creator, any painter or whatever, anybody who creates anything, we put this pressure on ourselves to create a pristine masterpiece, a product. And we're always like striving for like a thing that we can be like, look at my thing, I made it. But sometimes that in and of itself is a filter. Like sometimes just going and writing for the purpose of no one reading it, or going and painting for the purpose of no one seeing it, is, I think, a necessary therapy to sort of like, you know how you like flush beer lines, or sometimes you like get your oil changed in your car and you just sort of like get that gunk out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I find that especially in I always want to call it purgatory, but I mean quarantine. In quarantine, I've noticed a lot of these people, they're looking at all of the different instruments they have in their basement. They're looking at their Pro Tools, you know, for the second time ever, or whatever, or they're looking at their songwriting books, or you name it. And because we have all this time, I think we all feel like we have to like have something at the end of it. Like, look what I made. I had all this time. Look, but you know,
Yeah.
And I've been hearing this a lot from different creatives. Like, you don't like put down the pressure of having to make something with this time. Like, it's cool if you do, you know, but if you don't, no one's going to think less of you. You don't have to keep up with the Joneses all the time, you know, like you don't have to be competitive with anyone, not even yourself, you know, like if you create, friggin' good for you. If anyone sees it or hears it, awesome. If nobody sees it or hears it, whatever. But like, I think I will encourage the act of making things, but I also will not encourage the pressure, because I think pressure is the death of creativity.
Yeah, that's a great thing to end it on. I think we can leave it at that. Thank you so much for being involved in this.
Of course.
That's awesome.